It is Friday, November 4th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back. We are officially 5 days away from God of War Ragnarök launching, and we'll be talking more about that game later, alongside other various news stories in the world of PlayStation as always. But first, our PS Plus reminder, the November PS Plus Essential Games are now live, so make sure you claim those, get that done. And then also a little final call-out warning here for some games leaving PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium. 5 games are leaving on November 15th, which would be all 3 Mafia games, Mafia 1, 2, and 3 Definitive Edition, November 15th, and then also Ride 4, I should say, and MXGP 2021, the official motocross video game. A little weird here that, what happened previously was that Sony, for some reason, weren't displaying the dates when these games were supposed to leave, and then they put them back, which is good, but then they got rid of the section on the PlayStation Plus menu where it shows you, it's a whole category, it says last chance to play, a very easy way to reference what games are leaving, and now that's gone. So people had to manually check these games on PSN to find that they're leaving soon. Spotted on Reddit, then reposted to Push Square. So I don't know why Sony has to make this so complicated. Honestly, if it were me, I would set it to a minimum of like a month out, right, and keep that section on the PS Plus menu on PS4 and PS5. So set it to a month out, and hey, these games are leaving on so-and-so date 1 month from now, and that's on a rolling basis of titles that are exiting the service. Because with the amount of time left, if you want to like go through all 3 Mafia games, you might not be able to do that in time, or at least not do it at your own pace where it doesn't feel like you're being rushed. Now, in somewhat more positive news for PlayStation Plus Premium, we saw another game get rated in Korea, this time Siphon Filter 3, which thus far we've got 1 and 2, and thanks to Bend, those games did get trophies, so 3 is a natural expectation, I think. But at this point, we're still waiting on a ton of games, which we know are coming based on how this has happened, right? So we've seen Dino Crisis on PSN pop up by accident. We know Ridge Racer 2 had a store listing. Resistance Retribution was also rated. So there's a lot more games that are coming, just more a matter of when. Although, interesting to note for Siphon Filter, I don't think we brought this up during Let's Talk PlayStation, but the second game, which was the first one to have an NTSC option, that actually does not work correctly. It's kind of broken, and so you're still not really getting a proper NTSC version with how they released it on PSN. I don't know how they've managed to do this, especially because we're still waiting on other games in the back catalog, which there's not many to do, but we need those NTSC options as well. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done with Premium, but we can also say very, very quickly, next to Siphon Filter, Glover is coming back, which is another classic PS1 and N64 game, but that one is not coming through the Premium program, so always worth remembering that sometimes publishers or IP holders can bring their games back for their own interest of just launching it on PSN, Xbox, Switch, and that's what they're doing with Glover for, I imagine, a very small fee of like a few dollars or something. It's part of the Q-Byte Classics lineup. But if you are interested in classic titles, Glover is also coming back. Now, moving on to God of War Ragnarök. First off, not going to talk about spoilers, not going to display something that we haven't already seen before. But what we will talk about is the review embargo lifting from yesterday, and that's where we saw this game was reviewed very well. So across 116 different reviews, it's currently sitting at a 94 on Metacritic. Critically acclaimed, it's an exceptional score, and huge congratulations to the whole team at Santa Monica Studios. It's got to feel really good and liberating to finally be at this finish line of, working on this game for so long, and it's being received just as well, if not better, than the last game, which some deem as a genre-defining game on PlayStation 4, and they've seemingly done that again on PS4 and PS5 as well. So it seems like they've made a very special experience that is going to be a treat to dive into this coming Wednesday. And as a small little aside, of course, the game is coming out very soon, and so that's why we're now seeing multiple ad campaigns kick off for this game, and there's certainly some questionable ones out there. There's one for it recently came out in the West where it's Ben Stiller, LeBron James, and John Travolta in what can only be described as a family therapy type God of War Kratos Atreus session, It's so weird, disturbing, but also really funny. And there's also the one from Japan, which is about as Japanese as you can get, where it's making it's always such an interesting dichotomy of how Japan can do advertisements for what's supposed to be a very grounded, serious, adult-oriented experience, and they make such a light-hearted ad out of it. And, that's just, that's how they do it. So that one was really weird too. But one little thing that we did learn about the game, not really much of a spoiler, but something to look forward to when you're playing, is that there is going to be a transmog feature for armor, which I love. That's a way to, pick a different set of armor that you maybe like aesthetically. But if you pick something, or if you find armor that has better stats, but you don't like how it looks, you can, adjust that to your liking, keep the better stats, but change how it looks. So that was confirmed by the combat design lead, Mahir Sheth, on the official Santa Monica Studios Discord, that yes, there is a way to transmog outfits. And the way they phrased it made it seem like maybe it's not easy or it's not as robust to do, but at least it's an option. I love using that feature in games, and so good to see that it's going to be here in this one. Next up, some very big news that happened this past week. On Wednesday was the announcement of PSVR 2's price, release, and also some new games coming to the headset as well, which, big news obviously, so we did a video immediately covering all the details, but I do want to make a correction to that news. If you did see the original video, or if not, you can certainly go watch that, but also know right now that I rushed through that blog post and overlooked the announcement of how that's not every launch game, right? So that's something to keep in mind, is that not only were those just new games announced broadly, but not all those titles are launch titles. Some are certainly going to come later, and there is more than that coming. So Sony confirmed on the PS blog in that post that they're expecting over 20 titles at launch, and there's going to be more than what they discussed and what we talked about in that video. And Sony did say they'll talk more in the future about what the full launch lineup is going to be. So granted, the games they announced and what we know of so far don't seem as compelling, admittedly, right? It's certainly a lackluster lineup thus far, but we don't know the full thing, and so I'm sure we'll find out relatively soon. But there is something to be said about how they've done PSVR 2 announcements so far, where they're all blog posts, and the one thing, at least for this most recent post, where you would think it's kind of like a big deal, that's a lot of info, price, release, and a ton of games. This one certainly makes sense because it is a high price tag. And like we said, it is a comparable price range for, what PSVR 1 was for the specs and what's included. Yes, it is a fair, comparable price, but it's also a lot of money. And it's, Sony's not completely tone deaf. Sometimes they are fully aware of how these things are going to be received, and this thing probably wasn't going to be $550 here in the US originally. What we've seen in video games, the tech sector at large, and also outside of, technology, we're talking about food, housing, everything's going up, rising costs, inflation. I'm sure you're all aware of what's going on right now. And so when PSVR 2 was announced, 2 years ago, I feel like it was at the mercy of Sony having to raise prices, much like they did with PS5. Now Microsoft is finally being a bit more candid about how they might do it for services, games, hardware. They're being a bit vague there, but it seems like they're finally also being a bit open about how we are likely going to have to do that at some point. So at a $550 price tag, I think they were trying to price match this to PS5, but they simply couldn't. And oftentimes when companies have bad news or news that they know is not going to be received very well, they tend to try and downplay the news a number of ways. That could be sending out a press release on Friday for going under the rug by Monday, or maybe doing it in an unconventional way or something that's more uncharacteristic of the company. But with this announcement in particular, I can see why they maybe did it the way that they did, especially when they can focus more on the better aspects of it, because we don't know the full launch lineup. So perhaps they do have better news to share once it sounds way more compelling and they can kind of, get past that initial price tag, which if you do think it's too high, I don't blame you, but this is definitely 100% a weighted out device. So if you were interested in PSVR 2, but you saw the price and you're like, no way I'm paying that much, What you need to do is just wait it out, because only a year after the first PSVR, they threw in the camera, they price cut the VR Worlds bundle, and nowadays you can get a bundle for $200-something here in the US. It's going to price down. I think it will price down faster than PS5 hardware. It is a device that's speaking to a smaller audience. I think Sony, for the sake of adoption, are going to try and price it down as soon as they can. So this thing should have a very similar roadmap to the first PSVR, and so it's good that they kind of went all in on the specs, so that way it's locked in, and by the time you jump in, it's going to feel just as good versus other headsets that might be coming out in the market. Now, getting into Sony's Q2 2022 financial report, this will be running from July to September, and so as always, let's break down what's going down in the PlayStation business. So first up, Sony has shipped 25 million PS5s total worldwide. They shipped 3.3 million this quarter, which year on year is the exact same. And no, they're still not reporting PS4 numbers, so again, I think we're pretty much done on that. And sales were up 12% year on year, mostly due to foreign exchange rates, but operating income is down a significant 49% due to game development costs, expenses related to acquisitions like Bungie, and a decrease in third-party game sales and add-on content. Most notably, this was the quarter where PS5's price increase went into effect. So their only plus on operating income this quarter was a decrease in losses from hardware. Now, unless they're using some misleading wording here, this means the PS5 disc console, which was once profitable, no longer is. Mind you, the digital console was always, as far as we know, losing money, whereas the disc console reached profitability last year, and Sony primarily sells those, so we might have a direct answer on why they decided to raise the cost. But in fairness, it's not that direct because they didn't explicitly say the disc console went back in the red. In terms of fiscal year 2022's forecast, there's no changes in sales, but a 12% decrease is adjusted for operating income for most of the reasons that we've already gone over. During the financial call, though, is where we learned something noteworthy. Sony says their PS5 shipments so far is actually above their expectations, which is currently at 5.7 million units for this fiscal year. Now, if you remember, their forecast for the entire fiscal year is 18 million, and we only have 2 quarters left. Naturally, the holidays, they're going to have more consoles there, but there's still a lot of ground to make up. Anyway, the point is, the supply chain constraints are really opening up, is what Sony explained, so they expect to exceed that 18 million target, meaning that basically the next 6 months, it should be much easier to buy PS5, like perhaps significantly easier. And that is very good news. So again, holiday season, you expect that there is going to be more consoles, but they're currently at 5.7 million, and now they're expecting within the next 6 months to reach and exceed 18 million. So there should be a wide opening here for more PlayStation 5 stock showing up in stores, and you can walk in and buy one. And so we might get there even during the holiday season, which would be really cool. But more likely that'll be the case by Q1 of next year. Now, as for network services, PS Plus subscribers are currently at 45.4 million, which would be down 1.9 million from the last quarter, or 1.8 if we're talking year over year. Looking at the last 6 quarters, PS Plus peaked at 48 million, and monthly active users are also down to the lowest that they've been in the last 6 quarters, now at 102 million. Now, despite that decrease, this is a full quarter with the new PS Plus tiers, and we're seeing that do exactly what Sony was expecting, because revenue for the network services segment was up 10%, reaching 116 billion yen, representing the best revenue for network services during a quarter. So yes, enough people up their subscription to not only offset subscriber losses, but to actually exceed revenue performance. During the earnings call, Sony CFO Hiroki Totoki explained the decline was partly due to lower PS4 engagement, lack of promoting the new Plus, and also a lot more people going outdoors. They expect the next quarter to be much better with the launch of MW2, Ragnarok, and increasing PS5 supply, especially PS5, where that console has a much higher engagement rate for subscribers versus PS4. And so that was the big talking point from this financial report, was how Sony lost nearly 2 million plus subscribers even after the PS Plus relaunch. which this is mostly the same from what we saw in the last report, where a few things went down, including PS Plus subscribers, also monthly active users. And the CFO explained there the same thing, where COVID restrictions were lifting, and so people are going outside more often. And also there's some seasonality to it as well that we can't ignore. That's why they think the next quarter will be better, because it's covering the holiday season where people are going to, of course, spend time indoors, buy games, consoles, things like that. So that's mostly expected, but it's not like they're still off base by saying this when they're in the entertainment industry, right? So that's what we saw with the COVID restrictions, is that many companies were seeing a direct benefit to everyone staying indoors. And so whether it's video games, movies, music, just there's a lot of companies and sectors that saw a huge increase, and they kind of peaked, and now they're coming back down. And just because 1 or 2 quarters they're on the decline doesn't mean they're going to see more decline, especially because they're actually still at a point where they're above pre-COVID stuff, right? So in theory, if they're going to keep going down, they're not there just yet, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We are seeing exactly what the PS Plus tiers are meant to do, which is just extract a higher average spend per customer. That offset the losses here, but that's what it's for, because at a certain point, you're only going to reach so many people on console. In fact, we saw Phil Spencer, head of Xbox, actually be very candid recently with, he was speaking with the Wall Street Journal talking about, Game Pass stuff and the Xbox business, and there he was mentioning how when it comes to Xbox Game Pass on console, the growth rate is slowing down, because on console at a certain point, you reach that saturation level where you reach as many people as possible that are willing to subscribe. It goes back to an overall topic on the console business, where there's this artificial ceiling of just how many consoles a manufacturer is going to sell. There's always, a grand total of like 150 to 200 million at any given time, where everybody is, buying, owning, and playing consoles. The market has just stayed largely in the same area. And so the last Game Pass number we had was, 25 something million. They're seeing huge growth on PC because that's a new audience that they can reach. But that 25 something million number makes a lot of sense in the context of how many Xboxes are out there. Not really a console war thing, by the way. It's just, you have a given number, and then there's a certain point of how many people you're going to be able to reach. Sony is, I can't see them ever really getting, much higher than where they are right now with, say, just Plus subscribers alone, unless they start offering it outside of PlayStation consoles. So at this point in time, where it's around 45 million, give or take 5 million, it's really about sustaining that audience. And at least for the Plus tiers, trying to, get more out of each subscriber, and that's what they're doing right now. That's the plan. So it's not like this is bad news in here. It's just kind of business as usual. Nothing too shocking here, other than it seems like there is going to be a lot more PS5 supply, and that is good news. Now, speaking of PS5 stock getting better, we can also mention in a very isolated situation here, but it actually got good enough in Japan to where Sony outsold the Switch for 1 week. It was last week, and it wasn't by much, but this is the first time they've done this since PS5 launched in that country. So Sony sold 38,866 PS5s in total, both disc and digital, versus Switch, OLED, standard Switch, Switch Lite, 38,634 units. So it's close, but actually enough to where Sony did that. That was really surprising. And, again, Japan is going to be a situation where console gaming has been on the decline for a 15-something year period, so I don't expect this to be the norm, but it would be nice if enough PS5s also finally got sent there to where it's not this crazy, hectic lottery system, and people can just, also buy one at their leisure if they want. Now, moving on to Square Enix, where recently they put out their 2022 annual report, and it's kind of the same thing, a broad breakdown of what's going on with the company's outlook, their challenges, what they're planning on doing coming ahead, and, we've talked about them recently, about them being a possible acquisition target. There's been rumors, and so we've got some things in here that fill us in on what we might be seeing in the future. So first up, the current struggles the company is facing. The Square Enix president, Yosuke Matsuda, says, and I quote, "Achieving major growth in the game industry is difficult now for companies that compete primarily in the Japanese market, given its graying demographics. As such, it is critical for our business that we produce hit titles that speak to the global market, which offers greater scale in terms of both customers and sales volumes. The Japanese market is no longer sufficient for achieving a level of earnings that enable us to recoup our development investment and generate a profit, and we therefore need to approach our development efforts based on the assumption that we have to succeed in the global market." So we heard this before, and they were open to the idea of a more diversified capital structure for their studios, as in letting a third party buy a stake in their teams, and that's laid out more directly here where Matsuda-san says, and I quote, "By a more diversified capital structure of our studios, I refer to not fixating on full ownership and instead making various patterns of the studio's capital structure that enable sharing development risk with partners. Such a strategy would allow us to grow our studio portfolio as a whole while exposing ourselves to less risk. Specifically, we would diversify the capital structure of our studios by not only owning some studios outright, but also by welcoming third parties to take stakes in some of our studios, or by our taking stakes in studios outside the group." Now, there's also the mention of Square looking at AI, cloud, and blockchain as areas of investment. And so it seems like they've got a lot going on, and they might be looking at areas that maybe Sony isn't too interested in doing, like, say, blockchain, for example, or at the very least, I hope Sony has no major interest in really exploring that. But it's we're now seeing it laid out there plainly that they're certainly looking at having joint ownership in some studios and, accepting investment there. And that would be the most affordable way for Sony to go ahead and maybe secure some exclusivity with these valuable IP that Square does own. Remember, the rumor was that maybe Sony was looking at acquiring the entire publisher, and they would be a pretty decent fit where they would maybe allow Square to be largely independent still and handle, shipment of games on Nintendo, Xbox, if it makes sense and they want to. But some core, key titles like Final Fantasy, mainline entries you can expect would stay exclusive. And that's just, spitballing how Sony would maybe handle bringing on such a large, well-known third-party publisher. But not only would it be a lot of financial risk for Sony to drop that kind of cash on Square, but it just makes more and more sense for them to, do this, which Square is openly humoring. So I think we're bound to see something pop up soon where Sony makes a pretty key strategic investment in some of their teams. And, if that was announced tomorrow, I would not be shocked whatsoever. It's more affordable for Sony, and Square gets what they want while exploring all these other avenues, which, when it comes to, highly targeted Japanese games, they just don't work nowadays, or at least they're not nearly as profitable as they once were. You have to localize right away. You have to do these day-and-date global releases, and they do have to sell to that Western market where oftentimes they're selling more over there versus Japan. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things happen with Square very soon, which, by the way, that recent Forspoken trailer about the magic abilities, very good. We're seeing a lot of Forspoken's looking a lot better. That wasn't going to be its own news story, but just figured I would briefly mention that here since it was kind of, relevant. Now, in other acquisition news, on Hideo Kojima's recent podcast on Spotify, where he touched on video game rumors, he made a lot of really good, compelling points. We see a lot of this stuff in the games industry about how some stories are phrased, how people believe rumors so easily, and this and that. Really a good listen, but towards the end, he talked about being a possible acquisition target, and he reiterated again that they are independent. They have a good relationship with everyone. That includes Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and they have received a lot of offers to be acquired, sometimes massive sums of money, but Kojima says as long as he's alive, he doesn't think he'll ever accept one. So it looks like we have a pretty direct answer there as to, what Kojima may or may not do in the foreseeable future. And I think most of us suspected that anyway. He, after the whole Konami thing, it's just he wants to value that independence, and that's why acquisition seems less likely. But, partnering up with a big publisher that will, foot part of the bill for a project that he wants to do, and he can retain creative control, that is probably what he's looking for nowadays, and that's what he's getting out of both Sony and Microsoft for that matter. And we also have a small update for the teasing he's been doing. So that new poster was Shiori Katsuna, so not Margaret Qualley, which if it was Margaret, that would have told us that, hey, that might actually be the Xbox Overdose project. So it's seeming more and more likely that the game he's currently teasing right now is Death Stranding 2. Moving on to some PlayStation Studio PC game releases. Two of them recently came out, which was Uncharted and Sackboy, and they both did not do very good at all. Uncharted, which was a good high-quality PC port, topped off at like 10,000 peak players, somewhere around there, which was not very close to what was the lowest player count for the other PS Studio game, which was Days Gone. Forget what the number was, but it was not very close. And Sackboy did awful. It was like 600 players, which is, really bad, but not exactly surprising given what that game is. I just don't think PC players were really chomping at the bit to play Sackboy: A Big Adventure. And then there's also the fact that Sony only did 2 trailers and then launched it a few weeks later. And the price on PC, that market does tend to be a bit more sensitive, especially if there's this delta of when the game came out and now it being re-released at full price, right? So that's going to get in the way of a game that might not have been that exciting to begin with. Uncharted 4, which did a lot better, Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy, mind you, did better, but, it's a midpoint in the series. The genre might not be super conducive to something that PC players want to play immediately. So I'm sure they were affordable to ship over, but with Sackboy, I'm not surprised at all that was the results, especially with how Sony did very little promotion. Moving on to our next news story, we have a very familiar sounding update regarding the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard, where Microsoft's head of gaming, Phil Spencer, was recently on Jenna and Justine Ezerik's Same Brain podcast, and when asked about the acquisition and what they're planning on doing and this and that, Phil was very purposeful with his wording here, where he says, we're not taking Call of Duty from PlayStation. He says, and I quote, "That's not our intent. Our intent is not to do that, and as long as there's a PlayStation out there to ship to, our intent is that we'll continue to ship Call of Duty on PlayStation, similar to what we've done with Minecraft since we own that. We've expanded the places where people can play Minecraft. We haven't reduced the places, and it's been good. It's been good for the Minecraft community, in my opinion, and we want to do the same when we think where Call of Duty can go over the years." So, we can see that they're being a lot more careful and purposeful with their wording, which they've, this entire time, to their credit, have said, we want to do it, we want to keep, selling the game there, we intend to keep making Call of Duty for PlayStation, but there's always been these little oddities that pop up here and there. So like initially the wording was intent and we had good conversations with Sony, and that left a lot of room up in the air as to what they may plan to do after a certain amount of time. Then the whole thing came up with the proposed contract and 3 more years, and Sony said no. And we're seeing with the regulatory process that everything this company does, says, and prints is being scrutinized. So at this point, you can even see with Phil in this conversation that he sort of wanted to nip that in the bud immediately and say as much as he can to make it clear that, much like Minecraft, we want to keep this franchise going on PlayStation. And now he's going as far to say, as long as there's a PlayStation out there, we'll ship Call of Duty on that platform. I certainly hope that's the case. I mean, in an ideal world where this transaction does close, and I expect it to, I think a lot of people expect it to, although there's certainly been some roadblocks that are coming up that I think some didn't see, and so there might be a very real possibility that it does not go through, but I still think it will. But in an ideal situation where Microsoft, closes this acquisition, they don't pull away such a very large community, and obviously it would hurt PlayStation's bottom line. That's why Sony's been so defensive about the whole thing. But it's always worth keeping in mind that they'll say what they can in this moment to get it to pass through. Because my gut reaction to the Bethesda thing was always, okay, well, Skyrim, Starfield, those are pretty big properties. I don't think those will go exclusive, but sure enough, they did. This, of course, is a much larger situation, so arguably Call of Duty would finally fit that bill of it's too big to not release it on PlayStation. But, we've seen in the CMA's initial Phase 1 investigation that there is Microsoft documents that have analyzed the benefits of what they consider foreclosure strategies, right? Which means exclusivity, more or less. And they also specifically identify Sony as more of a close competitor versus Nintendo. And those are Microsoft internal documents, not something the CMA is saying, something Microsoft themselves recognize. So I don't think we'll really see what this looks like until a long time from now, where even in the short term, the deal closes, they ship Call of Duty on PlayStation. We don't know what they intend to do once, say, a new platform cycle rolls around. Next up, The Last of Us HBO TV series finally has a confirmed premiere date of January 15th. And keep in mind, this is HBO, so they're not going to drop the whole thing on January 15th. It's going to be episode 1, but at least we're going to get it very soon into the new year. I thought it would be a bit later than that, so that's good to see. And hopefully it's good. Still excited, but, sometimes it's hard to really find that good balancing act of, honoring source material, but playing up to the strengths of what would be a different medium, in this case television, and also trying to do some different things right and putting your own spin on the characters and the world, which is likely going to upset some people to a certain degree. I don't think there's any way to please everybody, but either way, January 15th, I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see how it turns out. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. And if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about the wall from this past week, and our Tuesday video was looking at PlayStation Home's recent revival from the Destination Home team. So they recently did a closed beta for their official build of the game, and it's a true online client where it really does work meeting up with other players. Also talked with one of the lead content devs, so go check that out. That was really awesome. And Wednesday was the PSVR 2 stuff. And this is actually the last LTPS before Ragnarok comes out, so if you're picking up the game, have a great time, enjoy it, and, of course we'll have a Tuesday video before then, but it won't be Ragnarok related, so just enjoy the game on Wednesday, and that's pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.